Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this episode are that of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the values of sponsors or other associated organizations. Welcome to the Parental Compass by Family Education and Support Services. I am your host, Bobby Williams. If you like what you hear on today's episode, I encourage you to please subscribe to the show. We drop new episodes often, and we want to be sure that you know about them. Today is a special episode because it is part one in a three-part series about community-activated prevention. The core idea behind this concept is that before someone reaches a point of crisis, where maybe they're in the hospital for substance-related issues or they're actively suicidal, before they hit this point, there were often warning signs. In these three episodes, we are going to explore what we as a community, as families, and as coalitions can do to intervene before situations reach a crisis level. Our guest today is Capetra Parker. Capetra is a senior community prevention specialist who has worked with communities across the country to help them build and develop their prevention strategies. Today, we'll get a better understanding of what prevention means and what it looks like when communities start to get involved. Let's check it out. So, what are risk factors and protective factors? Could you give me some examples of what that means?
Yeah, so risk factors are things that might be present in someone's life that increases the likelihood that they might experience what we consider problem behavior. So, for example, that could be like if within a community setting, if laws and norms are favorable to drug use, for example, then if the community's kind of laws, the cultures kind of support that, specifically when we're thinking about young people, then they're more likely to engage in substance misuse. In a family setting, that might be like family conflict. So, high levels of family conflict are risk factors. Having not great family management, this idea of knowing where your kids are, is also a risk factor. While protective factors, on the other hand, they reduce the likelihood or they act as these buffers so that risk factors can't be that strong on us. So that's, having pro social involvement, having positive connections to people. Those are the things that weaken risk factors from leading to unhealthy outcomes.
So I want to be sure that I get it clear. So risk factors are those things in your life that are negative and can lead to harmful behaviors. And then protective factors are things like being in a basketball team or having a supportive teacher at school, those kind of things.
Exactly. And what's important about this idea of risk factors and protective factors when we talk about them is that they've been studied. The relationship between these factors and behavior outcomes, the connection have been studied. So there really are what you would consider predictors. In a young we'll just talk about young people in a young person's life. They're predictors. Now it doesn't mean that just because you experience family conflict then you're on the road to having mental health challenges, but it can increase the likelihood.
How do you study something like that?
Lots of research over years. I mean, we're talking at minimum over 50 years of studying human behavior, looking at the context and the social determinants that people are experiencing in their everyday life and their community. So there's a field of researchers who are really looking at these relationships between risk factors, protective factors, and behavioral health outcomes.
We know young people have these different components in their lives, risk factors, protective factors. And what you're talking about is trying to intervene before a young person needs to go to the hospital for a suicide attempt or something like that. So, what's the difference between treatment and prevention?
Yes, you hit it on the head, right? Prevention is really about before I ever even see a problem happening, we're putting up a supportive environment to keep problems away. While treatment is very much like it's there, it's in our face, it's there, we need to change it. And so this idea of we haven't seen it, we don't know for sure if it's going to happen, but we're doing everything in our power to try and make it less likely to happen is prevention. While treatment, we're already there and we need to change it, the outcome.
So, how do you even identify? Like, this is a young person who has a high potential of having major challenges as they get older. How do you zero in on who that is?
That's a really good question. So, what we like to think of it is from the perspective of you're not really zeroing in on any specific young person. Prevention is done what we call universally. So, we're in a community. Everybody in this community is valuable. Everybody in this community is going to experience prevention, if you will. So, it's this idea of having a context or setting that has healthy components in it. And so, you don't know who is going to be the one that's at risk of suicide. You don't know who's at risk of substance misuse. You don't know who's at risk of violence and engaging in violence. And so prevention is really about making sure that everybody in the community has exposure to the skills and the knowledge needed to reduce the likelihood that they're going to experience those challenges.
So, I'm hearing a lot of different ideas about prevention and what you can do. Part of what I'm hearing is your family culture is really important and that there's programs and pro social activities available. What else can communities do?
Working together across sectors. So not feeling like the health of young people is only for families and schools is probably one of the biggest ones that I see, but really helping businesses, helping lawmakers, helping systems leaders understand that all of these elements that are present in a community have impact on the way young people develop. And so communities can really be great to bring those sectors together to educate, to raise awareness, and to leverage the relationships there to get the needs of young people met.
So, when I think about young people who are having challenges, it can sometimes be like a pyramid. There's this universal, everyone's there. There's the secondary where they're having some challenges and it's starting to be recognized. And then there's like the third tier, top of the pyramid, where it's an emergency. And I imagine young people can kind of bump between these different tiers. Do you think of it like that at all?
Yeah, I think that is a good way, and that's a realistic way that you see behavioral health play out in communities. And so, universal is this idea that we don't know yet if they're going to bump into the upper two tiers, but we're doing our part to equip them to try and keep them. I guess if you've heard of this analogy of like the river and keeping people from falling in, it's kind of that same thing, right? With universal, it's like we're trying to keep you from bumping up the tiers of needing the tiers of intervention. We're trying to keep you from bumping up the different tiers of intervention.
So, say we have a young person, how do we know that they're going from universal to the secondary tier?
They'll start to exhibit some of those behaviors. Once you get into secondary, then the symptoms are kind of there. You know, it might be like the skipping school or the disengagement, but they haven't got it to the point of like, maybe substance abuse yet, but maybe some of those things, those risk factors, they're starting to engage in those more. One of the things I think too is very interesting, like when I started this work, was learning about the prevention paradox. And so it's very common in communities that you'll want to like think about those who are experiencing the highest level of risk. Like, man, they have six things that are maybe not that positive that they're experiencing. And then you have a kid over here who really only has like two risk factors that they're experiencing. And so it's tends to be that we want to address the one who has the most going on. But how do we know that, that person who's experiencing two is not going to end up engaging in substance abuse or experience suicide ideation or things of that nature? And so the prevention paradox is you don't know which one is most likely to do it. The number of risk doesn't necessarily matter. It could actually be more so the type of risk. And so if we don't address everybody, we run the risk of missing people who also need our support just because they don't have a high list of risk factors they're experiencing.
Are there any key moments in young people's development where it's very important to get involved or risk factors are particularly high?
That's a good question. I think from where I sit, you want to get involved before they start experimenting with certain things. I think the prevention spectrum is wide, and there's things you can do across the lifespan to promote positive protection within the life. But to be honest, I was looking at some of our recent data and just seeing like around age 12 is where some young people are starting to experiment with substances and things of that nature. And studies have shown that if you engage in using drugs and things like that before the age of 13, then the risk of you becoming addicted to those substances is quite high. So intervening before then, we have some programs like Guiding Good Choices that's really geared to around that fifth to sixth grade age parents to start helping them prepare their young people for middle and high school.
So then is it just programs or are there other things that youth can do to feel like they're part of their community?
Okay, so it's more than programs. Programs are one aspect, but when we're talking about the social development strategy and we think of opportunities, having programs that young people can engage in, absolutely yes, wonderful. In addition to that, you also want to have opportunities that they can do in the day to day interactions. So, whether it's in a classroom and there's a role they can play in the classroom, it might be bringing all the pens out for everyone. It might be, let's say you have a class pet, feeding the class pet, things that help them feel connected to their community. In the family setting, having chores, being a part of grocery shopping and meal planning, like these are opportunities to be engaged. That also comes with skills that can go beyond like their young years as well, like as into adulthood, they can carry these skills. In a community setting, it could be that they get an opportunity. Older students get to help with like some of the younger student kids' little league games, for example. So it's not always programs, but it's this idea of being meaningfully engaged in your environment.
So everyone on some level wants to be a contributor to their community. And so if you're giving young people ways where they can be contributors, they feel more a part of the community and successful.
Absolutely. When you feel connected to your community, then you take value in helping it become a healthy and thriving place.
So I get the general ideas of what you're talking about, but what is community activated prevention?
Right. So community activated prevention is this idea that those members who make up your community all can play a role in promoting prevention. I think historically we have seen that schools and teachers and caregivers have kind of been the primary role players in thinking about young people's development. And community activated prevention really gets at this idea that everybody in the community really can play a role in young people's development.
So it seems like a lot of these things are happening. You'll have a nice teacher at school or a family that communicates well. But how do you make this more of a movement or something that we're all thinking about and building towards?
Yeah, coalitions really play a vital role in being able to do this. Coalitions allow you to bring groups from different backgrounds together in the community that are invested in youth and to align. Within that coalition, then you're able to have a shared vision, to have shared goals and understanding of how do you want young people in your community to thrive. So they are your biggest mobilizers, honestly, to create that synergy through the community so that everyone's saying the same thing and on the same page. And I honestly don't know if we've hit on this yet, but through coalitions, this ability to use data to make decisions is also really important in prevention science. When we talk about risk and protective factors, we're not necessarily saying, well, I just seen this happen, but it's really this idea of taking data from within your community, the voices of young people sharing their experiences, and using that to make decisions, to align programming, to determine spending and resources and things of that nature. Coalitions are powerful for that. And data is powerful in getting everybody on the same page, because I might not agree that we're seeing the same things, but data can kind of help us all say, this is what our young people are telling us, and to move on that.
Who would you want as part of this coalition?
This is a really good question, Bobby. So we want people from all sectors. You definitely want those from education, the businesses, local businesses in your community, the leaders of that. If you have nonprofit or foundations in your community, representatives from that. You absolutely want caregivers, um, those who are engaging with young people in a day to day. So whether it's like rec coach leaders or out of school time activity organizations. Really, what we like to start with is thinking about who do you define as your community? What do you define as your community? What do you define as members of your community? And then you want them represented on your coalition. So there's really not anybody we don't want. We want everybody, and we want everyone represented.
I could see listeners seeing these as sort of broad stroke ideas, but has this happened before? And what have you seen in communities that have done something like this? What difference does it make?
Oh my goodness, it makes all the difference. So in my role, I coach communities in this exact thing of developing community coalitions that are focused on prevention. And so what this can look like in a tangible way is first the idea of coming together. We follow the framework, or we are champions of the framework, communities that care. And communities that care is a system. Communities That Care is a guiding framework for coalitions to go from idea to action around prevention. So the first step is definitely this idea of coming together as a coalition and saying we want to, really address the needs of young people in our community, and establishing our board and work groups. This looks like collecting data about what risk and what protective factors are young people experiencing. Do they feel like if they engage in certain behaviors that there are adults who will say that that's not a good behavior? Or do they feel like, anything goes? Getting that kind of information from young people. And then as a coalition, looking at that data and determining, what, our young people are saying that our laws and norms are super favorable to substance use right now, for example. They don't think we care, they think it's okay. And so as a community coalition, we're going to get an alignment that we want to address this. And so the next step is to identify what existing resources are there in the community that address laws and norms, and what are the gaps. We might find that, we do have a program that's focused on teaching young people about the potential harms of engaging in substance use, but it's only for certain students. We're not actually doing anything universally. So that might be a gap. Or you might have a program that's considered evidence based, tested, and effective, but it's really hard for people to get to. So maybe that's your gap, is like the service area. Once you've identified those gaps, it's about coming together as a community to strategize how you'll address them, and then creating an action plan that leads to that communities then implement. So for communities that I've worked with, I have seen a wide variety of things that they've decided to do. So I think of one community. What they did was they went through this process. They identified, some areas they wanted to focus on, and what they did was, one, they started a campaign around the social development strategy. So once they learned about the social development strategy, they started asking, training educators and teachers and those working with young people around the strategy, and then they started highlighting the good opportunities that were made available to young people, as well as doing recognition. In addition to having this kind of campaign going that was promoting young people having positive engagement in their community, they also implemented some tested and effective programs, like strengthening families, for example, was one of the programs that they implemented, as well as guiding good choices. So a lot of times we'll see communities do a kind of a combination of doing an actual program that might be directed towards caregivers, or it might be directed towards youth in schools, in addition to some community norming as well. For example, we also see sometimes communities will have to make policy changes, like, oh, we weren't actually checking the age and ID of people before buying things. And so we need to actually beef that up and do that. So it has looked a variety of ways. And what I love about it is that communities are really thinking about what are they experiencing, whether they're young people experiencing, and tailoring their strategies to that, versus kind of like, this is what all youth in our country are experiencing, so we're doing something. But it's really getting specific about the youth in your community.
It's like doing an inventory of yourself and what is going on with us as a community and how can we address this. What's the data? What's the impact that you've seen happen?
We definitely see this idea of data is we see the change in risk and protective factors. So typically, communities will start out measuring, they'll administer a survey, if you will, that measures risk and protective factors. And as we see over a 2 to 10 year time period, those risk factors really do start to go down, and you have numbers to back it up, and the protective factors go up. We also see communities reporting this idea of being able to work together more efficiently and effectively, because their coalitions allow people to come together that maybe hadn't come together before, who are collaborating to bring resources to the community. And then you see the cost benefit for the economy as well. So, particularly with communities that care, as we have studied it over the years, we have seen that for every $1 invested in implementing CTC in a community, there is a $10.23 return to that community. So, for every $1, you're getting $10.23 in benefits back. It's pretty impressive.
It seems like it's very easy to get funding for when things have hit an emergency level. But this idea of prevention, it's a little harder to get the funding for. And I don't know if it's just everything is immediate in the here and now, or people don't really believe that it makes an impact. What are your thoughts around those ideas?
Yeah, you're right. I will say it is challenging, because what I say, is like, how do I prove to you that I stopped something from happening before it ever happened? It's kind of the thing that we're trying to do here, and that can be challenging. Things that can help with that though is just focus on data. So this idea of collecting data from young people about the risks that they're exposed to and the protection that they're experiencing, those are great starting points to leverage making a case for the needs of young people. If we think back to the beginning when we talked about this idea that risk factors and protective factors have been researched, this connection between, like, we're not just thinking that this might lead to this outcome, but we know there's an increased likelihood. And so being able to cite those kind of sources to potential funders, along with, well, our young people are experiencing these risk factors, can really help build a case for it. But you're right, it's challenging.
I like what you're saying about data of like this is something that's been studied for a long time. We're not just inventing this here, and this is proven to make a difference.
Absolutely. One of the things we always tell communities when they're first starting out with communities that care, for example, and we're training their coordinators, we say do no harm above all else. And one of the ways that you can do no harm is by really leaning into things that have been studied and proven effective. We don't want to guess on our most valuable, our populations are almost, I don't want to say possessions, but like, they're valuable to us, and so we don't want to guess. I mean, we want to do something that has been proven effective. We want to use our resources and our funding well, and so that's where that comes from.
Capetra, this is a great conversation and a great starting point, and I'm looking forward to diving in this with you a little more in our next episode.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Capetra. On our next episode, we are going to be zeroing in on families. What can parents do to practice prevention at home? We cover a lot of ground in it. You're really going to like it. We'll see you next episode. Peace.